Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Dan Reed with SCORE Maine. If you're unfamiliar with SCORE, SCORE is a nonprofit and an affiliate of the Small Business Administration, where we help small businesses and nonprofits here in the state of Maine. We help with the business side of doing business. We like to think that you're really good at the thing that you do, and we can really help at the business side of that. And we do that through small business mentors who give back their time and energy volunteering to meet with small businesses and nonprofits to talk about, what their options might look like and to kind of give back their experience. And with that, today we also do small business and nonprofit workshops, just like this one, where we invite experts from the field to come and talk about their experience and give us some insight. And with that, I would like to introduce and thank Abby for joining us today to talk about starting a nonprofit organization.
Thank
And
you, Dan.
I've been
Uh,
handed over to, oh, sorry, Abby, I'll hand it over to you in just one second. I do have to say thank you to the Maine Technology Institute, who is a sponsor of SCORE and lets us provide these webinars absolutely free to everyone. So thank you to the Maine Technology Institute. And with that, I will hand it over to Abby to kick us off today.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. So, Abby Yamamoto. I am the principal consultant and owner of Mission Mavens LLC. The relevant things here is that I've run both for-profits and nonprofits in different capacities. And so I am really interested in the business side of making social impact. So that's where I am coming from. One of the things that I have done is that I've grown a local nonprofit from $0 to $750,000 annual budget, and also from 0 staff to 10 staff. For that same local nonprofit, I facilitated a merger where there was a historically fiscally sponsored group that was interested in finding a home in as a program in a nonprofit that aligned with its mission. So I facilitated that. I also managed a local legacy institution, which had a larger budget of $5.3 million when I came on, and also had over 90 employees and 300 volunteers. And I am also on the board of Maine Association for Nonprofits, which has also helped me with parts of creating this presentation. So I just want to make sure that you know about them. They're a great resource also connected with the National Association of Nonprofits, which also puts out a lot of fantastic information for nonprofits and people considering nonprofit or different forms of incorporation that help people further their mission. So that's who I am. And I just wanted to ask you, if you haven't done already, to put in the chat box, this is the right side, your name, where you are coming from, like where you're sitting right now, and what you're hoping to learn today. And also, feel free if you have questions to just raise your hand or to come and ask your questions in the middle of the webinar as well. I enjoy interactive spaces, and I'd like to encourage that for you as well. Okay, so the agenda for today is just reviewing briefly what is your mission, and then reviewing the core is really about reviewing the organizations with maximum impact. And I'm purposely keeping organizations very generic because I do want to talk about the pros and cons of different options. And Cynthia, I think you are the one who said that you are already incorporated as an LLC and you're considering shifting into a 501(c)(3). So I think I might actually ask you to sort of talk about your decision-making process a little bit about that, because I think that a lot of people think that if they want to make a social impact, they must be a 501(c)(3, big public charity organization specifically. And I actually don't think that's necessarily the best way. But it is also true that some people have that decision-making process initially and then find out that it is actually better if they become a 501(c)(3). So I think, and you could also do the reverse, right? You could start off a 501(c)(3) and then shift over to be an LLC. And there are just many different options of how to incorporate. Just because 501(c)(3) is called a public charity organization, it doesn't mean that that's the only form that has to take. So I'm going to be reviewing those different options. And that's really the core today. And then I'm going to be briefly going over, what does it take to start a nonprofit, and some initial considerations that you want to think about that some of it will be presented already in the pros and cons of different options, but really honing in on what you do need to do as a Maine nonprofit. Also, because nonprofits, the requirements are different state by state, right? So I won't be really talking about anything outside of Maine, but a lot of things will be similar. And then there'll be a formal time for questions. And then I have a few slides that have additional resources, and I'll go through that briefly as well, just because there's some comments that I want to make about some of the resources that I'm listing there. Does anyone have anything, any questions, or are there any comments at this point? If no, I'll keep
I
going.
don't see any in the chat.
Great. All right, so let's just first talk about your mission. So I think many of you are in different spaces. Some of you have already thought about what your mission is quite in depth, and you can articulate this very quickly. But some of you are not, and so just kind of going through this briefly, and I am mostly asking the questions. The way I'm forming it is the way you want to present it to an investor, whether that's a philanthropic investor or a business investor. These are the kinds of things people are going to want to know. So in terms of being able to be sustainable financially, you have to be able to answer these questions this way, and that's why I'm presenting them this way. It's not the way you're going to present it to someone else is not necessarily the best way to generate it from within yourself, but I'm not going through the process of generating it right now, so I'm just going to give you how you need to present it to the outside world, sort of the end product of what it can look and sound like. So when you're talking about what's your mission, what you want to be able to articulate is, how are you different from other organizations and groups that are providing similar services? That's really the core of it, is what you're doing unique in the space that you're in. And the space you're in can be a specialty. It can be a location, a geographic location. It could be the target population. And there are many different ways to be unique and to be different in the way you're doing things, but you need to be able to articulate that you are filling a gap that hasn't been satisfied before. And so that becomes key in talking about your mission. So not just the need that is there, but being able to say how it's different and how you are aware of who else is doing similar work. So showing awareness of an environment that you're in is also really key. One of the problems that I've heard from philanthropic organizations is that someone comes up with an idea and it's a really good idea, and especially if it's someone who is trying to fill a need from a community that they're already from. It's particularly like it's articulated well, it seems like a great idea. The one problem is that they're coming with an idea, but they haven't necessarily looked around to see who else is already doing this work. And so there might actually be an organization that is fulfilling that space. Maybe that organization didn't reach them and that person's community. So then they happen not to know about it. So then the question becomes, is that existing organization not reaching that person or that person's community because of what, right? And that can become the gap that you can articulate to funders to say, look, they're not reaching us and this is why. But if in fact, reaching them, how are you going to go about making that gap, like closing that gap, right? Is that really to start up your own nonprofit, or is it to work with that existing organization? There has to be some kind of process that you're thinking about forwardly, like how are you going to solve that problem? And there's not one way to do that. And starting up a nonprofit is usually not the best way to do it. There has to be some kind of dialogue there with the existing organization to make sure that it's actually a good idea. And I say this because a nonprofit organization and any organization really is it's a legal entity, and there are a lot of requirements that come with it, and running it, you know, how Dan at the beginning was saying the business side of business. The business side of business often feels very disconnected from the actual impact and the actual things that you're doing. And so, what happens with a lot of nonprofits that start up, and not just nonprofits, but social impact organizations that start up as a business and make that structure without thinking about the business side of things, or it's not that they don't think about it, but without deep consideration of that, is that then they get really caught up in the business side of things, and then the social impact side starts to suffer. And so it's really important that you hone your mission, but that you also look around and make sure that you're not recreating a wheel, or you're not creating something that looks like something else, has an important differentiation, but maybe could have worked within that existing structure in some kind of way, and trying to make an effort, because making that effort might seem like more than building an institution, but actually building an institution has a lot more red tape than that sometimes feels like worth it if your ultimate goal is social impact. So you want to think about your mission, and then the other thing is you want to think about who's going to be on your team. And the team is the potential board members, if you're thinking about a nonprofit, volunteers who are going to help you make the impact that you're thinking of, and potential staff. No matter how small a nonprofit is, it's really tough to get things done if it's all volunteers, including the board members. So you do want to think about having staff at some point, and then usually it's the executive director that's the first hire. And then you kind of want to have a sense of who might be that good person, even if it takes a few years to get there, because also one of the best ways to get them involved earlier, either as a board member or as a volunteer. So you want to be thinking about that as well. And also, that's the other thing, is do you want to make sure you have a team that is going to be interested and passionate about the same project impact as you. Okay, so I'm going to go through the organizations of maximum impact and different kinds of organizations or shapes they can take. So I wrote that this is tax status. So for-profit business is a tax status. Nonprofit business is a tax status. And not having a tax status is also a tax status. Okay, so it's, and I'm saying this because it has a lot of consequences in terms of how complicated the office end of things and how things run are. And that's really what makes it key to think about what kind of different formats do you have as an option, and what is the best way for your mission right now to run the organization. So to go from the left side, for-profit businesses, there are a couple of different formats, right? This is very general, again, because I'm not going to go into the depths of how do we do this yet, but there are two, in big pots, there are two kinds of for-profit businesses. There's the traditional model, which is the LLC and limited liability company. There are several different forms of limited liability companies also, but I'm just going to put them into one bucket and say limited liability company. The difference between an LLC and an S Corp and a C Corp, which I've also lumped together, is mostly in the scale. Like LLCs can start from a one person. I mean, it could be a one person for profit business. S Corp, C Corp, always has at least a few people involved in the ownership model, in the ownership or shareholder model. So that's really the big difference between those two in terms of where you can start as the scale. And the and also the scale in the for-profit business also corresponds with complexity. So LLCs have one of the simplest systems in terms of requirements of how it has to run. The more you get like S Corp, C Corp, the larger scale you get, the more requirements there are and the more complications introduced. Although I would argue still less so than a 501c3 public charity. And this is one of the things I want to keep coming back to. And then you have the mission-driven for-profit business models, which are fairly new. And there are two types for tax status purposes. And again, the low-income LLC, the L3C, is for a much smaller, you could start at a much smaller scale. The PBC, Public Benefit Corporation, which actually I don't think is a format that exists in Maine, but exists in many other states. I think it was 35 states and L3Cs are in 8 states. But a PBC is a Public Benefit Corporation. Again, exactly what that means depends on the state that you're incorporating in. But that's also for a larger scale organization. That's more in the realm of S Corp, C Corp. And I didn't include B Corp, Benefit Corporation, because that's actually not a tax status, and that's a private certification that says that this for-profit company runs to have a social impact. And so it falls into this general idea of a for-profit business that has a strong mission behind it and works to not just raise profits for their shareholders, but also to make a social impact. But it's actually not a tax status. And so those are the different for-profit business models that you have to choose from. I think here, most of you are going to be looking at between LLC and L3C, a low-income LLC. Low-income, and it also has to have a specific social and educational impact that's written into the article of corporation that it's supposed to be furthering as well. So it's actually written in, but it's an interesting model. It's not tax exempt. And then with the middle one, no tax status. So this is for fiscally sponsored programs or groups. And fiscal sponsorship means that there's another 501c3 that is helping you with all of the financial requirements and all the other requirements that go with a 501c3. And that your group is not actually the one that's directly receiving any of the grants. And so you are a group or a program that is being that's being helped by another 501c3 public charity organization, and running a program that you have. So the fiscal sponsorship is a really common way for starting out nonprofits to go, because then you don't have to do any of the tax filings and registrations and all that, but you still get to apply for money that is only grants that are only available to registered 501c3s. So that's one option. Merging with a nonprofit that has similar mission to yours is also another option. So that was the case that I facilitated in a local organization where there was a local group that had been fiscally sponsored by another nonprofit locally, but then they decided that they wanted to, it wasn't like any trouble or politics or anything. They just felt like, as a group, they felt like they kind of outgrew that fiscal sponsorship model, and they wanted to move and become an official program of an organization that they felt was better mission aligned than the original organization that they're a part of. So then they came to us and they asked to become a program, an independent program within our organization, and then that's how the merger happened. So that's one way it can happen. There are many different ways mergers can happen. Sometimes there are two independent nonprofits. That's actually happening a lot right now because of the tight funding. It's, grants are really hard to come by right now, and and the grant landscape is pretty pessimistic. A lot of fundraisers are very pessimistic about the whole thing, and in fact, it's very difficult, and the requirements are changing a lot in ways that no one has expected. And grants are coming and going, and there are big cuts in certain areas and huge increases in others. So it's just very unpredictable. So it's a very tough landscape. And so there are a lot of mergers between established nonprofits as well. And then there are just independent programs where, like, just a group of people get together and they do something, right? The disadvantage with that is if it's a regular thing, right? And nothing that you buy, you can't tap into any sort of bulk buying or tax exempt status and things like that. But it's also a really good way to do things if you're not sure how long it's going to last, or if it's going to last beyond like one time. And also if it's not like something that costs a lot of time or money for anyone, but it's important to you, and you can do it on your own time. And it's also fairly infrequent, like a once a year event that someone does. It doesn't really make sense sometimes to like go through the whole process of either being fiscally sponsored or becoming a nonprofit or even setting up as LLC. Like it just seems like too much trouble for what it does. And so then that's also totally an option as well. And it's actually a good way to start if you just pilot things, to pilot things once or twice and to see if it gains traction. And if it does, then you can start thinking about maybe we should go for fiscal sponsorship, or maybe we should establish an LLC. So just being an independent program is actually an excellent way to start things. And then the nonprofit business, the 501c3 charitable organization specifically, because there's actually another kind of 501c3, which is a private foundation. We're not talking about that today. Today we're talking about charitable organizations. And so, there are many, and someone here was saying that there are 501c5 thinking about switching to a 501c3. So, there are many different kinds of 501c organizations. And I did list all of them under here in the parentheses. If you can see, the private foundations, social advocacy groups, trade associations, social and sports clubs, and there are just so many different ways. But the tax status for nonprofit businesses, and it's a business, I just want to say, the advantage is that you don't get taxed on any income that you gain for things that you spend on related to the mission. However, if you have a source of revenue that's not mission related, like you have a parking lot, right, and it's a great source of income, you have to pay taxes on that. So nonprofit business tax status, not tax exemption status, is only for things that are mission related. So that's something that you kind of want to keep in mind as you think about different ways of revenue as a nonprofit. Another thing about nonprofits is that the accounting system is incredibly difficult. And it's incredibly difficult. It's not so much the transparency aspect of it that's required by the government. That's just transparency, and I'm generally a great fan of transparency. And I mean, the thing about transparency is that you have to keep things very clean. You have to actually keep records of everything, and you have to document that. So it can sometimes feel a little bit tedious, but that's actually not inherently difficult. Where I think nonprofit business is incredibly difficult is the financial accounting, because you're able to apply to all kinds of grants, but all these grants, they're not free money. They are investments that come with a lot of strings attached. I just remember when I was running the local nonprofit, and our income was somewhere around like $250,000. But we had columns, we had like 17 columns of different grants that I was having to think about who was taking how much from what every month, and they all had different ending dates. Well, not, they didn't all have different ending dates, but many of them had different ending dates, and they had different total amounts. And so a lot of my work as the executive director was just thinking about where do I allocate people's times, and so where can I put their money But also, what was tricky was I had to make sure that the allocation of funds aligned with whatever mission I said, whatever mission that organization was giving the money for. And so the accounting system becomes incredibly complicated. This is, of course, resolved if you're a nonprofit that mostly just gets money from one or two sources. And those organizations exist. I haven't really seen it in Maine so much, though. And with this severe funding environment right now, I can't see that getting simplified because part of the reason why the accounting gets so complicated is that everyone is giving little bits of money. And I'm talking little bits of money in an institutional sense, right? So they're giving like anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 to $20,000, which for us individuals is a lot of money. But when you think about it institutionally, right, $20,000 doesn't pay one full-time person. And so what does that mean that you got $20,000 to use within a year? It means that you just got money if you can allocate to one person who might be getting, say they're getting a $50,000 salary, which means if you're thinking about benefits and all, you're actually paying them up to $70,000 and you just got $20,000. And you're going to have to figure out how to add 50 more thousand to that through other sources, right? And that's just for one person for 1 year. So 20,000 for one person in one time is a lot of money. For an institution, and you become an institution once you become a business that is hiring even one person, it's not a whole lot of money. And so you have to think about, I'm gonna have to get into thinking about how do I piece together this puzzle that isn't even complete, right? Because you have to keep applying for grants and you have to keep getting money. And you think you almost have a complete picture up until, say, March. And then after that, there are a couple of pieces of puzzle missing, but you have to keep going because you might get something that will fill those puzzles. And so you're constantly playing this puzzle game with finances and people's livelihoods because this is usually staff salaries when you're running a nonprofit, and it's incredibly complicated because you're also having to report out to each of the funders, for each thing that you're using the funds for or not. And it's just the nonprofit business model in terms of grants. You get the money, but the time you spend managing it is outsized compared to an LLC, where an LLC, you get the income, how you spend it is all up to you. You can spend it however you like. If you want to donate half of it, you can donate half of it. And if you want to just enrich yourself and keep using all the money that you make in the LLC, or maybe you're just scraping by, but whatever you want to do with the proceeds, it's all up to you. You don't have to explain anything to anyone. There's no documentation. So that leads to my next point of different ways to have maximum impact as a for-profit business. So I'm just going to present three different kinds, and truthfully, there are even more kinds to think about this, but I want to just present like three big models that there are using some specific examples. So largely, I feel like there's the healthcare professional model, and I call it that just because that's what a lot of healthcare professionals use. The profit donation model and the merging purpose and profit model. This is much more, a lot of B Corps are this model, right? But there is also a co-op model as well. Anyway, there are a couple of different ways to do this. So the healthcare professional model has the sliding scale pricing. And so psychological therapists often use this model. Lawyers also use this model. And what they do is that they have a sliding scale pricing. So people, and it's sliding scale. Some people go down to free, like $0, and some people just say like up to $30, whatever it is. But they have their true price that they're going to charge for the people who can afford it, and however they make that decision is also up to them. Or and they have a much lower scale, a much lower pricing as well. And how they determine who falls into which scale is completely independently determined. And they can decide that however they like. But what they can do is that, like as the person who's running this, certain percent of clients receive services for free or at low cost, and you are able to provide your good quality professional services to a certain number of people or to a certain percent of your clients, and you're able to make a social impact like that. And that if you're a lawyer, you're a therapist, you have these, very important professional skills, how important it is for people to be able to access this. And yet there's so little of it. So what you do is you make sure that you are supported in your income stream by charging people who can afford it the true price, and then serving those who may not be able to afford it but nevertheless need it, sometimes even more than the people who can afford it, a certain percentage of people, your services the same quality. And then the other model is the profit donation model, where you dedicate a portion of your revenue to a specific cause. Now, this is something you do completely voluntarily. Different companies have very different ways of doing things, but I didn't want to highlight a local example. There actually, let's see, there's a local example, Coffee by Design. They have a thing called the Rebel Blend Fund, and this is a model where for a pound of coffee they serve, called the Rebel Blend, $1 of that goes to an arts organization. So that's an interesting model. And also, I think, it's, it's very interesting. It's very creative. There are a lot of different creative models to this. Some organizations I've seen, some businesses I've seen say like 1% of our proceeds go to environmental causes, 5% of our proceeds go to humanitarian causes, like whatever. They usually are pretty vague about where it goes, because it changes year by year, right? And so you don't want to have to like update that too much. So, and usually a company has some kind of a focus, and that's helpful for the people who are seeking their grants. And it's also helpful for the customers who are paying for it to know that some of what they're paying for is actually going somewhere, that, for a cause that they care about. There was also a cell phone company on the West Coast called Credo, and every month they would have a vote of different organizations, that where they got some of their revenue. And so there were always three organizations that the members would vote for every month, that would get a certain amount, and that would get communicated out to the clients. So there are so many different ways to do it. And also pro bono work that a lot of lawyers or financial professionals do for volunteer, and a lot of consultants do. That's also a form of profit donation, because what they're doing is they're volunteering. It's sort of similar to the sliding scale pricing model, but it also has overlap with profit donation, in that they're donating some of their time through the profits that they receive. And then the merging purpose and profit model is really taking profit making and fulfilling a cause or a purpose, making it really work together. So another local example, there is a group called Prevendentia Group, sorry, and that's legal services, and they provide reasonable legal services with reasonable pricing. They also have a nonprofit side to it, but this one is the for-profit side. And so Prevendentia Group works to fulfill the social cause of making legal services accessible to more people, but still making a profit for themselves. So that's an example. Seventh Generation, they have a whole logo about cleaning products, and how they want to make a future where the next generation can thrive. And so they make sure that all their products are environmentally clean. And Bombas, which is a high-end socks and clothing company, they say one purchase, one donation, and they donate clothes, so they donate their products. So whatever you pay, essentially you're paying it kind of ends up like you're paying double, which probably is why they're a little bit high end and that they're a little more expensive. So you buy a pair of socks and then they donate like a pair of socks to their partners who then distribute these. And right now, they are very focused on people experiencing homelessness of different demographics also. And then, I mean, there are a lot of examples of this profit making, really trying to merge social cause and profit making. But just one more example is a company called Equal Exchange, which does fair trade chocolates and coffee. And they're co-op owned actually. So what that means is that all of their employees are owners of the company. And they also really try to they work with only small farmers, and also in terms of the in between transportation of the coffee and the chocolates, they try to do things directly so that they're really disrupting the model of how business is done. And so that's their whole purpose. And so really it's very purpose driven. Equal Exchange also is one of the most expensive coffees and chocolates on the market to buy. So what's a little bit of shame of these companies that do this kind of social purpose serving for a business model is that they tend to end up being higher end because it costs more, and let that be reflected in the pricing. But it is a model that you can follow. It's just, one of the models that can happen. So those are some different for business models. I mean, sorry, for profit business models that you can try or you can think about before you settle on a nonprofit model. I'm just going to take a little break here and ask if there are any questions or there might be any
Yeah,
questions.
we did have one question in the chat. Someone was asking about how grants are handled with fiscal sponsorship.
So grants are given to with fiscal sponsorship, the grants are given to the fiscally sponsoring organization. And then there's an agreement between the sponsoring organization, the sponsored group or organization, and usually there's some percentage that's taken out of the grant so that, and that goes anywhere from like 3 and 4% to about 15%. 10% is about the average. But they take that cut because what the fiscal sponsor, the organization that's sponsoring is doing is that they're taking care of all the accounting and all of the reporting requirements, and they work with you on that usually. So the amount of involvement is also a little bit different. But essentially, the sponsoring organization takes a small amount of your grant to then help you fulfill all these requirements for the grant. Does that answer the question?
It helps.
Is there something else I could be more clear about?
Cynthia?
Yes, thank you. In the same line as the question of Debbie about the first one, that S Corp, how is the grant handling with an S Corp or a C Corp?
So a lot of S Corp and C Corps are not eligible for grants, right? It's not an automatic no, and I will say that with a lot of workforce development classes, I've seen a lot of private for business companies being eligible. That's one area where I've seen that. In certain other areas, for-profit businesses tend to get cut out. And when I say for-profit, it includes L3Cs and public benefit corporations also. So that's that's the hitch there. Um, and but I think that a lot of people go for, and I'm not saying that this is you, but I'm just saying in general, I think a lot of people go for a nonprofit initially because they're expecting to get grants and to be eligible for grants. But getting grants is actually very difficult in that, and it's getting more difficult. And the amounts that are more readily available are in such small amounts, and the amount that you can get and the amount you have to spend to then justify why you got it in terms of the reporting requirements, both financial and narrative, often don't balance out. And that's why I'm kind of, saying that you really want to think about, is it worth your time to become a 501c3? If you already have someone who's telling you, if you have a funder who's saying, I have $150,000 here and I want to sponsor this program and you can hire 2 people out of that, or whatever, if you already have that conversation going, then I think it absolutely makes sense to found a 501c3, right? But unless you're having that conversation already, or that you're, highly eligible for this federal grant, and this depends on what field you're in. So if you're in workforce development, I don't think it makes sense really to go straight for a 501c3. If you are, if you're like in more direct services, social services type, then I do think a 501c3 is a serious consideration. So I think it also depends on what field you're in, and all of this can be answered with a much broader, kind of, people call it needs assessment, but it's really like surveying your environment and looking at what's available and what mission, what kind of impact can you have and where's the funding going to come from, and doing all this sort of, I think of as asset mapping, is really important because that's going to help your decision in terms of what structure is best. Okay. And so sort of to summarize, organizations with maximum impact, I've made this chart about, the traditional for-profit, mission-driven for-profit, nonprofit fiscal sponsorship. And then for the tax status, I called it IRS status because that is what it is, Internal Revenue Services. And it's about how you're filing your taxes. I mean, you have state requirements too, but and some of these are state registrations, but it's about how your taxes are being considered, right? And also the format that it takes. So with the for-profits, I listed the ones that can start at a much smaller scale on the top, assuming that that was more of my audience today. So the LLC, L3C, 501c3, public charity specifically, and then no IRS status is if you're a fiscally sponsored organization, and then whether you're tax exempt or not. So Cynthia, that kind of relates to your question. If you are any kind of for-profit, you're not tax exempt. You always have to pay on whatever income you get. With the L3C is really a structure that was brought up to try to make it easier for private foundations to work with a for-profit business. So I'll just say that, but it's getting a little bit into the weeds. So I'll stop there. And then the ownership is different. That's really the for-profit, nonprofit difference is in the ownership and the tax status. Those are the 2 big differences that people will notice, and also in the structure. So the for-profits always are either owned by an individual or managing members or shareholders, right? Shareholders are people who have the stock of the company. And there are so many different ways that this can happen, which is why I just lumped them together and said managing members and shareholders, but it could also just be an individual with certain setups. And then with the nonprofit, it's owned by the community. And so with the nonprofit, it's owned by the community. What does that mean? That means the board and board members don't own it. The staff don't own it. It belongs to the community, and how that translates is that for a for-profit, when it dissolves, right, all the profits come to the shareholders or managing members or whatever. You can make a profit off of it. If a nonprofit dissolves, the only people who can benefit from that are other 501c3s. So if there's any revenue or any sort of money left over from it, it all has to go to another 501c3 because it has to keep getting reinvested into making a difference and making an impact. And so a nonprofit doesn't mean that it doesn't make a profit. It means that all profits made have to be reinvested into the cause that it's built for. And um, so therefore, no one can make profit off of it. Only the community can benefit from it. That's what a nonprofit is. And so it's one of the reasons why these reporting requirements become so complicated, because there has to be absolute transparency. And then fiscal sponsorship, right? It's just owned by whoever is running the group, or maybe it's not even owned. That depends on who's running it. It's a lot looser in terms of how it's defined, um, just because there isn't like a lot of legal requirements around it, but you do have to have a contract with the sponsoring organization. That's where legality comes in. Um, and then I talked about reporting requirements, because this is where I think it gets very difficult. So at one point in my life, I was translating um, C-suite C-suite level, business business documents, from budgets to marketing plans and everything, for one of the largest corporations in Japan. And so what did that teach me? It gave me a crash course in accounting and marketing and business, right? I felt like I was going to business school and getting paid for it. That's really what it felt like, because I had to understand all these business concepts and budgeting and accounting concepts to be able to then translate it. I didn't have to understand it well enough to be able to produce it myself, but I had to be able to understand it well enough to put it into another language, and which was English in this case. I was translating from Japanese to English. And then um, so, I'm running my second LLC right now. I've run a nonprofit, and I've run a public institution that function like a nonprofit. So I've run, two LLCs and two like nonprofit like organizations. And the only reason why I was able to handle the accounting in the nonprofits or nonprofit like organizations was because I had that experience of dealing with accounting and budget sheets of one of the largest corporations in Japan. We're talking billion and trillion dollars worth of money that they were talking about. And they had very detailed item lines or line items. But it's really detailed. And that was the experience I was drawing on to deal with the finances of the two nonprofits that I ran. That's the level of accounting knowledge that you ideally want if you're going to be running a nonprofit. It's the finances of nonprofits are really complicated, because so often, at least in Maine, the grant landscape is such that nonprofits are drawing from so many different grants and philanthropic organizations and philanthropists that they are having to deal with. Like, I actually talked to someone who does a lot of fiscal sponsorships, and they have about 30 employees. I think she said they have like 113 lines that they're having to 113 columns where they're using to break down people's salaries, right? So the financial reporting and the financial aspects of nonprofits is really extremely difficult. Like, if you can run a nonprofit, if you can deal with the nonprofit finances, you could probably run an LLC that's 3 times the size, and just in terms of the financials. There are, of course, other skill sets that you need to run an LLC, but the financial reporting requirements are very complicated. And this is before you're talking about getting the grants. And then the mission reporting requirements are also often, this really depends on who you're getting the grants from, but this is also pretty complicated, and there's a lot of time spent on it. So the challenge with nonprofits is that, yes, you're tax exempt for any revenue and expenses that you use around your mission, but the reporting requirements are so much that you end up spending a lot of time and money and staff time. Usually you need a person, sometimes 2 or 3, who can just be dedicated to doing this because it's so complicated. Um, and so that's like a big piece. Fiscal sponsorship, not so much. So I'm gonna take another break, and if there's any, So I see the question from Justice. I hope I'm pronouncing that name right. Oh, so fiscal sponsorship. Oh, yeah, you're right. So actually, fiscal sponsorship, um, I said no, meaning that that's a really good point. I said no, meaning that there is no tax status there. That was really what I meant to say. But you're right that that doesn't really correspond well. So I should probably change that to a yes, right? Just to avoid confusion that you pointed out. Okay.
There was another one in the chat as well. Does an organization have to become a 501(c)(3) in order to take donations, and is it difficult to handle if not applying for grants?
Yeah, thank you, Debbie, for that question. So you don't have to be a 501(c)(3) in order to take in donations. The reason why a lot of individuals think that they can only donate to a nonprofit is because there is some tax deductions on their part if they do donate to a charitable cause. So it's really about how much they care about that. And if they don't care about having the amount that they donated be tax deductible, then it's not a barrier. And then is this difficult? What do you mean difficult to handle? What's difficult to handle? Can you elaborate?
Yeah, so I guess it was like I've heard a lot of people say, well, you need to become a 501(c)(3) in order to take in donations because it encourages the donor to donate. So, but if you're not an organization that is applying for grants
Mm-hmm.
and you become a 501(c) just for that reason, is it difficult to handle the donations?
Mm.
Like you don't have to worry, like you said, the grants are a problem.
So that's a great question. I have to say that grant reporting is really complicated when at the state level is one, and then at the federal level even more. And the terrain is also shifting rapidly when it comes to federal grants, which will have an effect on state grants too, because a lot of state grants come from federal grants. So that's really difficult to say how that's going to change. But I'm just going to talk about like past experience. In that sense, um, it was very complicated. What in terms of donations, so donations, it depends on the donor. So donations, I think, are tricky because it depends on the donor, and a lot of donations come with arbitrary strings attached. So if you can find a way to get donations that are general for general operating costs, which means that you can use it for wherever there's like the highest need, then it's not so difficult. And for that, is it worth becoming a 501(c)(3)? I think that's an interesting question, and it's possible that that makes it worth it. There are a couple of other reporting requirements, a little more in depth than you would need for an LLC, but it's not terrible. And I think if you're mostly looking at donors, it might be, I mean, it's definitely worth considering.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. And Janet, I see your message. I don't know if she's still here, but thank you. Um, Discouraging about finding it. I mean, I feel split about it, honestly, about, whether people should start a nonprofit or not. I think there are certain cases where it does make a lot of sense. It's just that when you walk into it, you do need to know how much business acumen you actually need when you're running a nonprofit. And I think that a lot of people feel like because a nonprofit is so passion driven and it's about intent, that you don't really need like the practical skills. And I just want to say that's not true. If you can run a nonprofit well, you can probably run a business pretty well too, at least in terms of the back office function. And that's kind of what you need to be prepared for. And yeah. So starting, going back to the slides, I do have just a few more, although our time is coming to an end. So this is a very high level, starting a nonprofit in Maine, and this comes directly from the Maine Association for Nonprofits. And they have a link in there also that that you can follow. But it's really, like anything, there are a lot of steps to it, and certain things depend on what your scale is and things like that. And really, probably the best way is to go to this link because it's really a very comprehensive link. And there could be a whole other webinar, right, about just going through this process, and probably makes more sense as kind of an let's do it together, walk through it as you're doing a start the process through the webinar kind of thing. So that this is just, I'm just going to read the top part, which is assess readiness and alternatives. So that was really what we're doing today. And then lay the groundwork, which I'll talk about in a second, just a couple of things. And then incorporate, apply for tax exemption. And then the lasting stay exempt is about maintaining that status. And so there's that. Maintaining the status, I don't find to be so complicated. It's really about the reports that make nonprofits complicated. And so just laying the groundwork and things to think about, I had originally talked about mission and the team. So one of the key parts is about, and I'm running out of time, so I'm just gonna briefly say and not actually read through it. You have to think about governance, which is dictated by the board of directors. And this tells you some of the things that you want to keep in mind. And this slide actually comes from another slide that another SCORE mentor created for SCORE Maine. So I just want to, express appreciation for that. It's not like my original slide. And a lot of these things are also same kind of information. Sometimes a lot more in depth is listed in some additional resources that I have in the last 3 pages. And the board management is a really important part of nonprofits. So that is something that is also adds complications, but also it's part of like working with community, right? When you work with a community, it's, it's harder to make decisions with more people and to run things. So getting buy-in and community building becomes important, and board of directors is kind of the micro level of that. And then I do want to touch on the raising funds part, or maybe I'll just skip this part and then we'll just go to questions, which, Dan, do we have like a few minutes to allow for questions?
Yeah, we have another minute or two. We do try to end pretty close to 1. I do have to hop off for another meeting.
So if there's anything that anyone wants to ask.
How small of a board do you need for a 501c3?
In Maine, you need at least 3 board members. That's the minimum requirement. But it's the minimum requirement, and you're really advised to have a larger board.
And that would be the secretary, treasurer, and
And the
chairperson?
chair, yep.
So they don't have like a president, they have a chair.
That also depends on the organization, and yeah, it actually, a president is slightly different, but you can have a chair or a president, I believe. Okay, so,
Go ahead.
oh, okay, so I hope that that was helpful. I know that some of you were coming from a different place, perhaps like a little more beyond this place, but I hope that for many of you, this was like helpful things to think about. And if you would like to get in touch with me, there's some additional resources. I would just say the Maine Association for Nonprofits is a wonderful resource. They have a LinkedIn page and they have an Instagram page, and you can follow them there, and they will like also list all the workshops that are going on. And also there are a lot of workshops that are happening for free, and finance is a big barrier for a lot of people. So I just want to let you know that there is a free workshop happening that talks about the how to ask for money from a professional fundraiser. And if you would like to get some more information on that, please be in touch. I'm gonna put my email address in the chats, and you can contact me here anytime. And of course, Dan and I are in touch as well, so he can also pass on my information to you. And I hope
Yeah,
that
thank
was
you, Abby,
helpful.
for presenting to us today. I will include the recording, the slide deck for this workshop, and Abby's email in the follow-up. So be on the lookout for that in the next few days. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and I hope you had a great day.
Thank you.